And now, a free press debate. Is designing babies unethical or a moral imperative?
After screening, we are left, as you see, with 2 healthy boys and 2 very healthy girls. Naturally, no critical predispositions to any of the major inheritable diseases. All that remains is to select the most compatible candidate. Hazel eyes, dark hair, and fair skin. I have taken the liberty of eradicating any potentially prejudicial conditions.
Right. We were just wondering if it's good to just leave a few things to chance.
You want to give your child the best possible start. Believe me, we have enough imperfection built in already. And keep in mind, this child is still you. Simply the best of you.
The gene editing revolution is here.
This is an amazing tour de force of science.
We now have the technology to erase mutations that cause devastating disease.
For the first time in history, doctors have successfully used custom-made gene therapy to treat a baby born with a rare genetic disorder.
The CRISPR technology has the potential to do many beneficial things for society.
I feel like a guinea pig.
We'll be able to handpick our unborn children's sex, height, even IQ.
Each embryo is scored for disease probability,
risk of depression, anxiety, brain fog, inability to deal with stress. All of these risks were really low.
It means that many genetic diseases will become, in some ways, a choice.
I have type 1 diabetes. I would do anything to not pass that burden along.
So, is this humanity's next great leap in improving our health? Or are we inching toward a new era of supercharged eugenics?
Here's the thing. There is no, I don't think, perfect human, right? Do I want to be big and muscly? Do I want to high endurance?
Someone's going to come out and say they're a eugenicist, they're a Nazi, whatever. That really bothers us.
Tonight, the Free Press and Fire present an urgent debate. Is designing babies unethical or a moral imperative? And now, introducing the founder and editor of the Free Press, Barry Weiss.
Hello to my family and the other 5 people that happen to be here. It's so good to be back in the home of the Steelers, the Pirates, Permanis, and of course, Weiss House. If anyone is thinking of redoing their living room, my Aunt Stacy is here and she can give you a 50% discount for some very nice wool wall-to-wall carpeting after the show. Pittsburgh is where it all started for me. It's where I was born, it's where I was raised, it's where I experienced my first anti-Semitism. But more seriously, now that I've become a Sancerre guzzling coastal elite, I can tell you that people are just better here, and it feels so, so good to be back at home. So thank you so much for having me. Before we get started, I want to take a moment to thank an organization that I've been involved with since college and that I'm so, so proud is sponsoring tonight's debate. And that is the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression. Please give them a round of applause. I appreciate fire every day of the year, but I especially appreciate fire today. And I'm going to try not to cry. For those who haven't yet seen the news, just a few hours ago, the conservative commentator Charlie Kirk was killed when he was speaking at an event at Utah Valley University. Charlie was 31 and the father of 2. Charlie made his name and built a massive political movement by doing something radical. He pitched tents on campuses around the country and welcomed students of all political beliefs to his table, inviting them to debate and disagree. I have seen so many hours of Charlie Kirk doing what he did, and he would truly talk to anyone. In doing this, he swayed minds and changed lives. And just maybe to put it another way, he made his name by devoting his life to the thing that is the very lifeblood of America. The ability to speak freely and without fear of violence. The ability to resolve debates and disagreements with words. That is the foundation upon which all of our nation's freedoms are based. And he embodied those freedoms. And that is why the murder today of Charlie Kirk, whatever you think of his views, is an assault on everything that makes America exceptional. Tonight, I am praying for Charlie and praying for his family, and I'm praying also for our country. There was a survey that was released just yesterday from FIRE that found that 1 in 3 students in this country believe that violence is acceptable to stop certain speech. If we want our nation to endure, we cannot let this view win the day. And if you're here tonight, if you're showing up on a Wednesday night to a debate about gene editing, maybe it's because you're related to me, but maybe it's you because you believe, like I do and like FIRE does, that free speech should be defended for everyone, especially those that you passionately disagree with. If you're here tonight, it's because you know that our country's ideals need to be embodied, need to be acted on, need to be protected. And free speech is at the heart of everything. So thank you so much for standing up for those values and for being here tonight with me. So 3 years ago, my wife, Nellie, who you heard as the voice of God, she thinks she is the voice of God, we became parents. And we spend a lot of time doing things that we didn't do before, things like changing diapers in very inopportune places. Anyone that has changed the diaper of a 34-pound 1-year-old on an airplane in the middle of the night knows what I'm talking about. And we also spend a lot of hours worrying about what to feed them, how to educate them, how to protect them, how to keep them healthy. We tally the dollars that will go to, I don't know, ballet classes or Mandarin lessons or summer camps, anything to give them the best chance in life. And I would do anything to help them become the happiest, most successful, healthiest version of themselves. But what if I could start earlier, at the molecular level? What if I could ensure that my children and yours were healthier, smarter, and stronger before they even took their first breath? Right now, several biotech companies are doing just that. They offer embryo screening for couples undergoing IVF. And these companies don't just screen embryos or score them for disease risk, which has become standard practice for anyone that's undergoing IVF. They go further than that. A company called Orchid Health, for example, makes IQ predictions. Nucleus Genomics promises optimization of traits like resistance to cancer and heart disease, as well as intelligence, longevity, BMI, I could use that, baldness, eye color. It even promises to predict whether or not your baby will have a predisposition to becoming an alcoholic. In the future, we may be able to do more than just screen and select. We'll be able to make tweaks to our own embryos, the embryos of our future children, in order to optimize them. And this isn't something out of Huxley's Brave New World. It is the very real future. In order to understand what's just around the bend, you need to understand what is already possible today. And there's 2 types of gene therapy, 2 types that are going to come up in tonight's debate. The first is called somatic editing. And this is the kind that's already being used on people, already being used on babies. You may have read that in May at the Philadelphia Children's Hospital, this somatic editing was used to save the life of a baby boy with a rare metabolic disease. The second kind, the kind that conjures up images of designer babies, that is called germline editing. And it involves tweaking sperm, egg, or embryos to change a child's DNA before they are born. In other words, preventing them from ever having a disease that you need to contend with in the first place. It is much more elegant, it is much more efficient technically, and it is also much more contentious because it involves tampering with evolution itself, turning the most intimate part of life, reproduction, into a site of engineering and optimization. The already life-changing impact of the first kind, somatic editing, helps us understand what is about to be possible with germline editing. But the prospect of shaping children before they're born, of course, raises a tangle of moral dilemmas that we're going to discuss tonight. Is it ethical to design our unborn children? Or are we morally obligated to do so when the risk of abstaining includes serious diseases? Does designing babies cross a line? Is it wrong to play God? What does it even mean to play God and manipulate humanity's genetic heritage? So before I invite tonight's unbelievable debaters to tonight's stage, and before we get into it, I need you to tell me where you stand right now before we even begin. And this is the proposition again for tonight. Is designing babies unethical or a moral imperative? We do a lot of debates. I think this one actually is maybe the most confusing. I don't know exactly where I stand on it. So you're gonna tell us where you do. And you're gonna do that by taking out your phones, take them out, and you are gonna text vote 1 to the number right up there on the screen. Take a minute to do that. I see some friends of my parents who are gonna struggle with this technology. Guys, it's 888-465-2807. Once you text vote 1 to that number, you're gonna text the letter A if you think broadly it's unethical, or the letter B if you think broadly it's a moral imperative. While you do that, I am so excited to introduce 4 brilliant people debating tonight's proposition. Arguing that designing babies is not only an ethical choice, but indeed it is a moral imperative, is Jamie Metzl. Jamie is a technology and healthcare futurist who is a member of the World Health Organization Expert Advisory Committee on Human Genome Editing. He has also written several best-selling books on the subject, including Hacking Darwin, Genetic Engineering, and the Future of Humanity. Everybody, please welcome to the stage, Jamie Metzl. Joining Jamie is Dr. Allison Berent. Allison is a veterinarian who has become an incredible force for genetic research since her daughter Quincy was diagnosed with Angelman Syndrome, which we'll talk about somewhat tonight. She serves as Chief Science Officer of the Foundation for Angelman Syndrome Therapeutics and Chief Development Officer at a biotechnology company, where she helps accelerate gene therapy programs for Angelman syndrome. Please give it up for Dr. Allison Berent. Thank you so much. On the other side, arguing that designing babies is unethical is Carter Snead. Carter is a bioethicist and a law professor at Notre Dame. He served as general counsel to the President's Council on Bioethics under George W. Bush and as an appointed member of UNESCO's International Bioethics Committee. He is also an appointed member, this is the most exciting, of the Pontifical Academy for Life, which advises the Pope on bioethics. Please welcome Carter Snead to the stage. Thank you so much. Last but not least, joining Carter is Dr. Lydia Dugdale. Lydia is a physician, a medical ethicist, and a professor of medicine at Columbia University, where she serves as director of the Center for Clinical Medical Ethics. She is also co-director of clinical ethics at New York Presbyterian Milstein Hospital. Please welcome Lydia Dugdale. Thank you so much. Okay, let me explain the rules of tonight's debate. Each of these 4 debaters is going to get 5 minutes to make an opening statement explaining their proposition on the motion. This is the beginning of their effort to convince you tonight. We'll start with Jamie, then we'll go to Carter, then Allison, and then Lydia. Then we're gonna get into it. And these people are very nice, so hopefully they're gonna draw some blood, we'll see. Then at the end of the night, they will have 2-minute closing statements, and then crucially, you are gonna get to vote again. So how do we decide who wins? It's the team that changes more minds. The team that sways more of your minds by the end of the night will be named the winner of tonight's debate. So to figure out who won, we gotta know where we begin. Let's take a look at the initial polling results. Okay, is designing babies unethical or a moral imperative? 66%. Caucus with Carter and Lydia believing it's unethical. And yes, correct. You guys were getting along so well backstage, I'm like interchanging. 34% believe it's a moral imperative. So these guys have their work cut out for him. That is where we stand. Let's see who can change the most minds over the course of tonight. Let us get started with Jamie.
Thank you very much. It's my great pleasure to be with you tonight. Although I strongly believe editing the pre-implanted embryos of future humans in very limited and carefully considered ways will someday be justified, I also believe we must be extremely conservative about the conditions in which this can and should be carried out. All of life and potential life is extremely precious and must be treated with the greatest respect. But there's a reason our ancestors domesticated plants and why we've more recently developed medical treatments to save the lives of children and others who would otherwise die of terrible and perfectly natural genetic disorders. Not having consistently available food and letting our kids die may be perfectly natural, but they're also highly undesirable. All of our most powerful technologies have tremendous upsides and potential downsides. But that doesn't mean we should either utilize them without limits or ban them as unethical. Controlled fire, agriculture, and industrialization, the cornerstones of our modern lives, have all been massively beneficial and occasionally harmful for our species. We don't ban them as unethical, but regulate them for the common good. I was one of the first and loudest voices condemning the deplorable Chinese biophysicist He Jiankui for genome editing the pre-implanted embryos of what became the world's first CRISPR babies born in China in 2018 and 2019. Dr. He's actions were both a violation of the Hippocratic Oath and Nuremberg-style human experimentation. As a member of the World Health Organization Expert Advisory Committee on Human Genome Editing, I also helped draft our demand that a Russian scientist refrain from editing the pre-implanted human embryos he said he was planning to take to term in 2019. I completely understand how the idea of genetically modifying the pre-implanted embryos of future children scares people. The possibility of life-changing technologies being misused should both scare us and inspire us to proceed with thoughtfulness, extreme caution, and significant guardrails. But while we fear and work to prevent abuses, we must also consider the life-affirming treatments that are already saving lives at the intersection of medicine, assisted reproduction, and biotechnology. There are today at least 8 quote-unquote designer babies already living in the UK who've had their fates changed from being born with often death-sentence mitochondrial disorders to being born perfectly healthy. I don't have time to go into the details, but these births are the result of heritable mitochondrial transfer treatments of pre-implanted sex cells, a procedure stemming from extremely responsible science, extensive public consultations, effective oversight by the UK Human Fertilization and Embryology Authority, and highly informed parents hoping to pass the gift of healthy life to their children. Today, somewhere between 1% and 3% of all children are born with single-gene genetic disorders, many of which can prove fatal or massively debilitating. Some of these disorders are currently treatable, but many are not. Here are the options. We can do nothing. Abort pregnancies when concerning signs are indicated. Engage in fetal surgery to try to address the condition in utero. Treat the disease, if possible, after the child is born, or screen out or edit harmfully mutated embryos prior to implantation during in vitro fertilization. I am not here to make a case for or against any one of those options. Different approaches will almost certainly make sense in different circumstances. For the well-being of future generations, we must allow the careful consideration of all of them while avoiding unjustified vilification. In some cases, if treatment after birth is clear and easy, that might be the best option. In other situations, like where both parents would otherwise pass on a grave, untreatable genetic disease to all of their children, and where the number of embryos may be limited, making minor edits to a pre-implanted embryo may provide the greatest contribution to the health and well-being of the future child. Why would we possibly prejudge this kind of process by randomly labeling one treatment inherently unethical, even though the approach might be able to change a child's story from a tragic death after a few painful months to a heroic death at 100, surrounded by generations of children and grandchildren? That's why our careful and cautious WHO expert committee asserted in 2019 that, quote, it would be irresponsible at this time for anyone to proceed with clinical applications of human germline genome editing. Our use of the words "at this time" made clear that we believed, like most other expert commissions on this issue, that heritable human genome editing was not inherently unethical, just not ready for broader human application. We can easily imagine future scenarios where heritable genetic interventions might significantly decrease our lifetime risk of dementia or cancer, offer us greater defenses against novel pathogenic viruses, and perhaps even give future generations the chance to survive on a planet made inhospitable by climate change. We'll need to carefully weigh the potential benefits and risks for all of these hypothetical approaches. Of course, we need to recognize that manipulating dynamic living systems requires existential levels of care and caution. Of course, we need to recognize that highly effective and broad-based governance and regulation are required at all levels. Of course, we need to recognize the danger of bad, slippery slopes.
10 seconds, Jamie, 10
while
seconds.
acknowledging that applying these technologies to save lives in carefully designed and limited use cases might slide us down good slippery slopes towards saving more lives and making more dreams come true. While we must aggressively call out the irresponsible, just to be fair, I was told that I would have 6 minutes. While we must aggressively, this is to take it up with the staff, while we must aggressively call out the irresponsible and ill-considered applications of heritable human genome editing as unethical or worse, branding all potentially life-saving and life-affirming approaches that way today would be like calling agriculture unethical 10,000 years ago or calling vaccines unethical now. While neither, this is the end, while neither unequivocally condemning heritable human genome editing nor blindly supporting its unlimited application, we must make sure its limited future applications are carefully considered, well-governed, and responsibly delivered.
Wow, Jamie. Okay, guys, 6 minutes on the clock for Carter in case he needs it, just to be fair.
Jamie should have gene-edited his statement. Just kidding. I love Jamie. We're best buddies now. Many thanks to Barry, the organizers, and my fellow panelists for this opportunity to participate in this important and timely conversation. Tonight we're talking, or I will be talking, about germline genetic engineering of children, modifying the egg, sperm, or embryonic offspring of parents to make specific genetic alterations that will be passed on to the children of every future generation of that lineage. Nearly every country in the world that's considered this question, including our own, but also progressive nations like France, Sweden, Germany, Canada, the UK, and bodies such as the EU and the Council of Europe have effectively banned it, mostly out of concern for possibly insurmountable safety issues that could have multi-generational destructive effects. But I'm going to put questions of safety to one side. The title of this event is a question. Is designing babies unethical or a moral imperative? To get to the heart of the matter, I'd like to refine the question slightly and ask instead whether it is ethical to design our babies. Let's unpack the individual parts of this formulation to see if it sheds light on the fundamental ethical issues at stake and offers any guidance as to how we should act. First, what does it mean to design something? To be clear, it is not designing a baby to conceive multiple living human embryos by IVF, screen for preferred traits such as sex, IQ, skin color, eye color, and the like, discard and destroy those embryos that don't make the cut, and then transfer those that do to initiate a pregnancy meant to result in the birth of a live child. That's sorting, not designing, which comes with its own set of vexing ethical questions, some but not all of which overlap with tonight's discussion. Designing, by contrast, is engineering or building a thing to a particular specification of one's own preference. It is the exercise of rational mastery and control over an object that one might desire very much, but is still one's own creation, one's own built project. Second, what, and more pointedly, who are our babies, and what do we owe to them? To say our baby is to identify oneself as a parent. Our baby is a relational statement. It indicates the connection of parent to child. How should a parent think about the identity of his or her child? The best answer to this question that I've heard is from Leon Kass. Quote, "A baby is a mysterious stranger that we welcome and love unconditionally." Our baby is a gift, and the fitting response to a gift is first and foremost gratitude. Unconditional welcome and love of another who is utterly dependent upon us for her survival and flourishing. As parents, we're called to love without counting the cost or seeking anything in return. Alongside gratitude, the fitting response to the gift of a child is humility. With that comes the virtue of what Bill May has called openness to the unbidden. A related virtue is tolerance of imperfection. The opposite of these virtues are hubris and pride, desire for rational mastery and control, manipulation, and even commodification. This child is ours in the sense that we are family, and in that way we belong to one another. But she does not belong to us in a way that an object belongs to us, even one that we've designed and constructed ourselves. We did not build this. We don't own this baby. We stand to her in a relationship of stewardship and love. To borrow the words of Gil Mylander, who borrows them from a more ancient source, only a child that is begotten and not made can truly stand in equal dignity to those around her. So, is it ethical to design a baby using germline genetic engineering? Not in the sense of design as I used it above, creation of a being with elective traits and characteristics that reflect our desires and aspirations. I would respectfully suggest that this is not consistent with an ethic of giftedness and the love that parents owe to their children. But I would distinguish such action and motivation from making a therapeutic genetic intervention that has been proven to be safe and efficacious in a child already here, even at the embryonic stage of development, for the sake of correcting a serious gene-based illness or pathology in order to restore her to a species-specific range of healthy function. That, by my lights, is using the art of medicine to care for one's child as a patient. It is not the same thing as designing our baby. Thank you.
Thank you to my fellow debaters. 12 years ago, I became pregnant with my second child. It was incredible news, another baby girl, which came at a moment when my own life was thriving. At that point, I was a successful veterinary interventional radiologist focused on solving unmet medical needs. That meant building solutions for the incurable, creating devices to bypass failed organs, treating congenital defects and repairing malformations, giving animals and their families a second chance at life. This career shaped my understanding of medical ethics. I remember when we developed the first artificial ureter for a cat. We implanted it, and the cat thrived. Thousands more followed, and no one asked, is this ethical? Should we be doing this? Of course. You relieve suffering if you can. You innovate to restore health. And yet, when we talk about applying technologies infinitely more transformative, technologies that could save children from devastating genetic disorders, suddenly we all hesitate. That divergence became deeply personal when the baby girl I was carrying 12 years ago was born. Her name is Quincy. At 5 months, she was diagnosed with a rare, severe, random neurogenetic disorder caused by one single faulty gene. It's called Angelman Syndrome, a single mistake in over 20,000 genes, but it robbed her of nearly everything. Her speech, she can't speak a single word. Her independence completely gone, leaving her to rely on others for every basic function in life. It brought relentless seizures, sleepless nights, and difficulty walking and balancing. And yet, Quincy is gorgeous in every way. She shines. She's radiant and joyful, funny and smart, deeply social, and highly opinionated. She's irreplaceable, she's memorable, and she is specific. After her diagnosis, my life changed. I dedicated myself to fixing what was broken in her. I became the Chief Science Officer at the Foundation for Angelman Syndrome Therapeutics, or FAST, where I now oversee the development of nearly a dozen gene-targeted therapies, including gene replacement and gene editing strategies, to restore that one single genetic mutation that was stole from Quincy and 500,000 other people around the world. These technologies, some already in clinical trials, are medical marvels, but gene therapies given after birth can target only small portions of her cells. They can't bring profound improvement. They bring profound improvement to human lives, but they can rarely restore full function to an entire organ, especially the brain. The only thing that could have done that for Quincy would be by editing the egg carrying this random mutation at or before fertilization. So in plain terms, what we're debating tonight is whether you would cure my daughter of all or only part of her disease. Whether to give her some advantages she doesn't have today by editing her today, or the full independence you and I take for granted every day. If Quincy were to become an embryo today and germline editing were off the table, my choices would be stark: terminate or consign her to profound hardship. Many would advise termination. Try again. Have yourself a healthy baby. It's random. But that logic misses something essential. I don't want another child. I want Quincy. I want her laughter, her humor, her kindness, and her essence, but free of the hardship of Angelman syndrome, free of the burden she and I never chose. We live in a time where fetal surgery corrects spina bifida, congenital heart defects are repaired in utero, and intervention keeps moving earlier because prevention is stronger than repair. So why stop short of the earliest intervention when a single corrected sperm or egg could prevent a lifetime of suffering in every single cell, not just some of them? So I ask, if you wouldn't hesitate to let me repair her malformed heart or reconstruct her ureter, why not let me repair her gene? At the point with the highest chance of success, why is this any different? Consider cancer. If we had the technology to prevent it before birth, would any parent refuse? Would any doctor say, no, let this child experience that cancer and endure chemotherapy, radiation therapy, and pain, and then we'll do our best to eradicate it? Of course not. And yet that is exactly the argument made when we outright reject germline editing. Let me be clear. This debate for me is not about designer babies, not about eye color, height, or IQ. It's about potentially preventing Angelman syndrome, or Rett syndrome, or cystic fibrosis and ALS, and thousands of other horribly devastating disorders. And not by terminating every affected embryo, but by preserving that specific human life, just unburdened by disease. And so the question is simple. If we accept medicine postnatally and surgery prenatally, why stop short of curing disorders at their origin when success is likely greatest? Why accept partial improvement after birth when we can prevent suffering altogether before? If we can responsibly ensure a child is born free of devastating disease, is it not our moral imperative to do so? I stand here as a clinician scientist who knows these tools exist, as a drug developer pushing them forward, ensuring their safety, and most of all, as the mother who has held her seizing daughter in her arms, begging for it to end. I cannot, and I will not accept preventable suffering as destiny when we have the potential of these solutions before us. And if this were your child I was speaking about, I know you couldn't either. As a parent, you would shake the world to find a cure for your baby, especially when the technology is able. Will we let fear paralyze us, or will we use the extraordinary knowledge humanity has built to potentially create a future free from the cruelest genetic disorders responsibly? For me, for Quincy, and for the millions of other children yet to be born, the answer is not just yes, it is we must. Thank you.
Well, thanks to Barry and the Free Press team and to my fellow panelists who are now my friends, so it's hard to debate with them. Before I begin, though, I just want to make very clear where I stand and where I believe Carter stands. We fully support gene edits to cure diseases when those edits won't be passed on to subsequent generations. The safety issues there are beyond what we understand right now. But we can debate the possibility of doing these edits, as Allison brought up, assuming we get the technology where we need it to be. Those are my preliminary. Now I need 6 minutes. Okay. This country's founders believed it was self-evident that all men are created equal. But the proposition before us tonight is that people do not have to be created equal. The prompt for this debate asks, is designing babies unethical or a moral imperative? And my answer is, first, it is definitely not a moral imperative, and second, it is certainly unethical. First, the moral imperative issue. A moral imperative is a command that dictates how one should act. There should be no command to design your baby because it gives at best the illusion of control. We don't fully understand the human genome. We don't understand how environmental factors affect our genes, and we do not understand how all genes and parts of the genome affect each other. So let's assume for the sake of the debate that we get to the point where we understand how all our genetic material works. Remember, and you might not know this, that our human DNA actually makes up only a tiny fraction of the DNA that affects our bodies. So what's the other DNA? It's actually the DNA of the microbiome, which refers to the viruses, bacteria, and fungi that live on and inside our body. So to put this into numbers, DNA numbers, we think that the human genome, or we know that the human genome, it codes for about 20,000 genes that instruct our bodies how to act. By contrast, the microbiome codes for about 20 million. And those 20 million genes of the microbiome actually affect our health. They are known to affect digestion, they affect our immune systems, and they even affect how our brains function. So yes, we might get to the point where we can edit our baby's genes, but there is zero chance we will ever be able to edit the DNA of the microbiome. Designing babies also should not be a moral imperative for another reason. You can edit out all the diseases you want, but in the end, most young people die from injuries, not from disease. Unintentional injuries is the leading cause of death every year for people ages 1 to 44, far surpassing deaths from suicide, heart disease, liver disease, diabetes, stroke, and something else I forgot combined. There should be no moral imperative to design a baby because try as you might to tinker with that baby's DNA, designing children simply feeds this illusion of control. And it also feeds a lie that we are nothing more than our DNA. And that leads me to the second part of my remarks on ethics. The idea of designer babies is unethical because it's fundamentally a eugenics project. Now, eugenics was the name given to the ambitious movement among societal elite about 100 years ago to improve the human gene pool. The idea was you take really intelligent and good-looking people and you tell them to get together and mate, and they produce enhanced offspring. This is the same thing we do when we breed horses for speed or muscle or good looks. Now, how were we attempting to improve human stock? Well, in the 1920s, it was quite fashionable to go to state and county fairs and participate in fitter family contests, where families were assessed against one another, much the same way, Bessie the cow is assessed among other cows. They were assessed for their hardiness, for their fitness. And the families that won these contests were encouraged to have lots of babies. Then there was the Repository for Germinal Choice, which better known as the so-called Nobel laureate sperm bank. This was created in none other than California in 1979. And the idea was you get lots of smart men to donate their sperm, including at least one known Nobel laureate, and you produce very intelligent babies. And that sperm bank is thought to have produced about 218 very smart kids. And then, of course, as Barry mentioned in her opening remarks, the 80s and 90s with the rise of IVF brought the possibility of combing through catalogs of potential sperm and egg donors and identifying those characteristics that you might want in a future child. But here's the problem. These efforts at encouraging optimal reproduction always have a dark side. If we want some people to reproduce, then we want other people not to reproduce, even if we don't say this out loud. If some traits are desirable, then clearly other traits are not desirable. This is why the United States forcibly sterilized some 70,000 people in the early 1900s, most of whom were poor, non-white, and with intellectual disability. This is why the US Supreme Court supported this move, declaring, this is our Supreme Court, quote, "It is better for all the world if society can prevent those who are manifestly unfit from continuing their kind," end quote. Of course, in the 30s and 40s, Germany got onto the forced sterilization campaign and forcibly sterilized some 400,000 Germans, mostly with mental illness and intellectual disability, and then killed another 300,000 Germans. And of course, you don't need me to talk to you about how the Nazis murdered 6 million Jews because they were deemed racially and therefore genetically inferior. Silicon Valley might be able to sell Americans on genetically modified offspring. But the assertion that some lives are worth creating always means that some lives are not worth creating. And perhaps some lives may not be worth living. And in fact, perhaps some lives may be worth destroying. Vote no on designer babies. Thank you.
I don't know if there's ever been a more nuanced group of people on a free press stage. And so I want to draw it out, both for myself and for the audience, to make it clear where you guys actually disagree. And I want to speak to what Allison so powerfully said there at the end, which is, why is it different? In other words, what is the moral or ethical distinction, sorry for the feedback, between germline editing her daughter Quincy, before she came into the world, and only being able to give therapeutic medicine, I know I'm using the incorrect terminology, afterward, which would not fully heal her. Why is it different? And is it different for the two of you?
Sure, I can jump in. So the distinction is between edits that only affect the human being as present and edits that can be inherited. So even if Quincy, if we may, since you brought her into the conversation, even if Quincy were to have been edited as a fully born child, those edits would not be passed on to any future children she might have. That's somatic editing just in Quincy's body. When you're talking about editing egg, sperm, or embryo, those edits are always passed on. Now, I said this very quickly in my remarks, but safety is a big thing. We don't understand what it means to tinker with one piece of DNA and what the ramifications might be on another part of DNA. We do know that some genes, for example, have both benefits and harms. And so because we don't understand what happens when we make changes to the gene pool that can be inherited, there's been really almost a worldwide consensus that we should hold off until we study and understand the technology better. I was just trying to complicate this by saying there's all these other things we can't control that affect genes, and we have no idea how they will affect them.
But what's this? So if it's no secret that, you know, in a relationship where there is not a man, you need to use IVF, which is how my wife and I have children. When you go, this is standard practice. You go to the embryo place, you know, there's a lot of these new ones. Ours was in a mall. They basically say to you, they grade the embryos, okay? They say it's an A embryo, a B embryo, and a C embryo, and you can make decisions about whether or not you want a boy or a girl, but basically they're like, you put in the A embryo, it's the healthiest embryo, you have the best chance. Is that complicated for the two of you? I just want to understand how deep the opposition goes.
So back to the question, yeah, so the reason that there is, so in bioethics, there's very rarely international consensus. There's something like international consensus in the early 2000s about what's called cloning to produce children, sometimes called reproductive cloning. Everybody was against that. The same is true of germline gene editing. There is a consensus about not doing germline gene editing, and the reason for the consensus is the issues around safety. That's the principal driving force behind the consensus. The issue is, as you just said, if you make a mistake, if you have an off-target modification, you modify a gene.
But let's assume it is safe.
That's the problem, though. Is it like how could you, as a question of structuring a research protocol to test the safety? How do you test the safety? Because again, maybe there's a way to do it.
There is. There is.
Okay. Well,
but go on, Carter, finish.
My final comment that I made in my remarks was a therapeutic intervention to help a child, even a child at the embryonic stage of development, if you could do it in a safe and efficacious fashion, strikes me as a very different proposition than the notion of designing babies. The question that I think we're responding to is, is there a moral imperative to design a baby? Helping a baby who has a genetic abnormality repair the genetic abnormality, if you can do it in a safe and efficacious way, is is not designing, right? And that's why I think the conversation is nuanced. I didn't hear anybody make the case for designing babies in terms of elective traits like IQ, sex, et cetera. And so that's sort of what I think we were primarily talking about. But in terms of the apparent consensus among all these countries and the WHO and all these other intergovernmental bodies is that the scientists, at least the consensus thus far, is that there's yet to be a possibility of imagining a way of making it safe. Now, that's a practical obstacle, right? And not an in principle sort of obstacle. Now, you asked I'm sorry to keep monopolizing the conversation.
You're going to tell us how it already does exist.
And
yes.
your sizzle reel, and then your comments about the grading of the embryos gets closer to the kinds of concerns that I have about what it means. What's the proper fitting, ethical, loving parental relationship between a child and a parent? Is the notion that the more you introduce rational mastery, technical control, manipulation into the procreative process, you're moving away from the sort of ideal, which may never exist in reality, of welcoming and accepting your child in an unconditional way. Your child is not your project. Your child is, in fact, another human being who has dignity and agency and autonomy. And so to the idea of imposing rational mastery in that way, and even in the context of selecting for certain kinds of traits, I think that raises the same problem, right? And then, of course, there are issues involving the moral and ontological standing of the embryonic human being early on, and how to think about that, and what the ethics of manipulating and using and destroying embryos are, which one actually isn't the main question in the issue of germline gene editing, because we're talking about helping in a therapeutic way a child at the embryonic stage of development, which in fact actually points to the continuous identity of the child from embryonic, fetal, newborn stages.
Jump in, guys. You don't need to wait for me.
Sorry to take so much.
Not at all.
Thank you so much. So raise your hand if you've seen the movie Annie Hall.
Come on, guys.
Yeah, all right. So you know the scene when they're in front of the movie theater and people are talking about Marshall McLuhan, and Marshall McLuhan walks up and says, "I never said that." So in response to what Carter said about these commissions saying we should never do germline, I was a member of the World Health Organization Expert Advisory Committee on Human Genome Editing. We were the lead organization making these recommendations. And what we said, as I said in my opening remarks, is we weren't ready at this time. At this time means should be banned, it's at this time. So absolutely, there are safety issues that need to be overcome. What you described, Barry, when you went to your mall was eugenics. That it was eugenics. You had whatever.
You could also argue that eugenics is just dating.
No, for sure. For sure. That's what I'm saying is we can, like eugenics.
I'm just saying, where's the line?
So that's assortative mating. But eugenics, in the sense that there were 10 potential lives in that laboratory,
right there.
And using that mechanism, your embryologist reviewed them and said this one looks pretty good. You could also extract a few cells at 5 days of maturation in the lab, and you could genome sequence all of them, and you could say, well, this one looks like it's not going to have a deadly genetic disorder, and this one looks like it will, and you could use that to make, so just that something is eugenic. I'm the child of a Holocaust survivor, so I'm extremely sensitive about issues of eugenics, but there are also issues of how do we optimize for our health. Allison's child had a de novo mutation, which means it just was randomly generated. But there are lots of people, like with Huntington's disorder, who have heritable, terribly deadly genetic disorders. And you can just trace the families generation after generation. And so what we're saying is if your thing is, well, we're not going to try to change that single gene mutation that leads to unbelievable misery across multiple generations because we have this for some reason, this thing, oh no, that's terrible. We can only treat them after they're born, even though the treatments aren't that good. That doesn't make any sense to me. And so, Carter, I think with love, I think you conceded the whole debate, actually.
I felt like you did when you said there was no design.
Hold on, hold on. Let me make my point.
Yeah.
I feel like you conceded the whole debate when you said if you had a pre-implanted embryo and it had a deadly genetic abnormality, and you needed to change that single mutation in order to get that child from that future child of someone who would die after a few months to live an entire life. That is designer babies. You are changing.
That's what we did.
No, I'm saying, but by any.
The word design is doing a lot of work on this stage.
But all I'm saying is, as somebody who has been part of this debate for 20 years, when people say there's making heritable changes to the human genome and there is not making heritable. Once you say, well, we can do it in some circumstances, then we can say, well, under what circumstance? So if you think that under any circumstance, it would be morally justified to make that one single change to eliminate Huntington's disease from an entire generation of a family, then you agree that it's a moral imperative. Not that everybody has to do it, but that some people be allowed to do it. I think that's the key point.
Lydia, go ahead.
Yeah, no, well, you had a thought immediately. I'm following.
So the reason this debate is hard to get your arms around is because we're not talking to each other. I drew a distinction between designing, which has to do with elective, non-therapeutic interventions, versus a therapeutic intervention, right?
But a germline, this is a germline, because when Barry set up the debate.
Guys, use a specific example. We have an embryo here.
The debate is, the question on the floor is it ethical to design babies? That's the question.
But you guys are using the word design
That's
differently.
The problem.
So
Right.
don't use the word design. Edit an embryo in order to prevent a horrific disease.
That's a very narrow question. That's not designing.
But yeah, I think.
Why?
I think
What is difference between editing and designing?
But Barry, I think
yeah.
and Jamie's, some of your work, your published work talks about this. Once we're very comfortable with the technology where we can edit a gene in an embryo that will be inherited to prevent a devastating disease, there's no reason that the technology won't expand. I mean, why?
This is the question.
This is why we have to put them together. And so I am drawing the line because of safety issues at no changes that are heritable. No changes. Because of safety issues. And I don't think we will ever in our lifetimes get to it being safe enough to do it. At the same time, I can imagine a scenario where you say it's one edit. It's going to give this child life in an unbelievable way. Are we willing collectively to accept the risks of not knowing? And it may be that we say, well, we don't understand DNA 100%, but we're like 95% of the way there. Let's just take the risk. But once we open that door, everybody in Silicon Valley is going to be editing their babies to the nth degree, and that's where we spiral downward. I don't think there's any way to keep control on this.
That's the whole point of the debate.
Correct.
They're saying
I'm trying to get us there.
Yes, you're getting us there.
Yes.
Because what I'm hearing broadly is you guys are saying not worth opening the trap door, and you guys are saying worth opening the trap door.
In very limited, contained, careful ways.
It will never be contained,
See, but
Jamie.
this is where I don't agree, and I think scientifically, I think we're at a point when we talk about the word design. Let me just go back to the word design, because that's, I think, troublesome a little bit. To me, selective editing is design, and that includes severe debilitating disease. That's what I interpret as design, not necessarily hair color, IQ.
I love that there's a baby in this room.
He's voting.
And let's pray that baby does not have Angelman syndrome. But I look at this as selective editing, and I look at selective editing in which the only way to secure the safety of that child is that every cell is edited. The only way to ensure every cell is edited is that you edit at the stage of an embryo, which means their germline will be edited.
Yes.
But I also do not want my daughter to perpetuate Angelman syndrome to other babies because she is edited and can now procreate, and now will make more babies that will incur suffering. So to me, I think the technology is actually very close to being there, and I do believe in our lifetime it will be there in terms of understanding off-target. The technology of understanding off-target editing has escalated in the last 9 months in a way in which you would never believe. And so it may not be there today, but the question is it a moral imperative? In my world, eventually it will be. Today, I don't think anyone's editing babies, but if we can determine from a regulatory perspective the risk of doing nothing outweighs the risk of doing something.
So I want you guys to contend with what I think is the strongest argument on this side, which is the second this technology becomes available, and you guys know so much more than me about when that will be, if that's already here. Let's leave that to the side. The second it becomes available, what is to stop it from being used?
Regulations.
To build 6'6",
like everything else in this world, we can't.
So there are no regulations at the. I'm sorry to interrupt you. Please go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt
No, that's okay. I think that like everything else in this world, things don't start and then suddenly it's just exploding and everyone could do anything. With medicine, there are regulations. If we have a proper regulatory system, there will be regulations in which this would be considered a clinical trial under regulatory provision, and then you can only do it in certain circumstances where certain things are followed that follow a guidance.
If I could just add, just respond briefly. So in 1978, the first IVF baby, Louise Brown, was born, and it was in the early 80s. The first American IVF baby was born. In the IVF context right now, we have a regulatory landscape that is completely unbounded. There is no regulation on sex selection. There's no regulation on trait selection. People are doing the polygenic risk scores for IQ. They're doing all kinds. So if we look at like what the regulatory landscape looks like right now, there's interventions.
And the hyper-wealthy are
of course
in their
it is.
way designing babies.
And by the way, the Center for Germinal Choice, the Nobel laureate that you mentioned was William Shockey, if memory serves, who was a white supremacist.
Yes.
And everybody else was a schlub. You know what I mean? Like, I'm sure they were great people, but they were not Nobel laureates. And he was a white supremacist Nobel laureate.
Yeah.
So the point is, if we look as a law professor, as a regulator, to say, okay, are we prepared as a legal framework to regulate this context, and to, if we open the door to it, if safety can be resolved, which I think is a hard question, can we say, yes, you can edit for the sake of therapeutic interventions, which I don't think anybody in principle objects to, but you can't intervene to change your baby's height, IQ, eye color, et cetera, et cetera.
You can to change a Huntington's disease or a single gene deadly mutation that would be heritable. You're saying
there's no precedent in American law or regulatory practice in the past 40 years that supports the proposition that we have the will to regulate assisted reproductive technologies for applications of non-medical purposes. The most common form of pre-implantation genetic diagnosis in America is sex selection. Okay, that's the principal application of PGD in the United States. It's available in 85% of IVF clinics in America.
What's PGD?
Pre-implantation genetic diagnosis, for the sake of seeing what kind of chromosomes your embryonic child has. Is it a little girl? Is it a little boy? And we can imagine what happens when those decisions are. And those are ratified by the American Society for Reproductive Medicine, which has a wide open libertarian perspective.
Carter, do you think that selecting sex is wrong?
I do.
Yeah.
I do. Yeah. I mean, I don't want to, let me put it a different way. I think that it is inconsistent with the kind of mindset of open, unconditional love for one's children that best personifies the parent-child relationship.
But Carter, what about that specific question of this? There's a pre-implanted embryo, you have one, you do it's through IVF, you do the pre-implantation genetic testing, you find it has this heritable gene for Huntington's.
Yeah.
So you think it is ethical or unethical or allowable or unallowable, presuming that it's safe, to make that single change so that the child and all of its progeny moves from having Huntington's to not having Huntington's?
If we stipulate that it's safe and efficacious, which I think is the contested question, then I wouldn't object to that. But the point is,
that's a designer baby.
It's not. That's where we disagree. That's not a designer baby. That's medical care for a child at the embryonic stage of development. That is taking a child at the embryonic stage and using a gene intervention to help that child, as opposed to what you're describing, which is the kind of elective, non-medical interventions, which, by the way, and the point is, the current point which Lydia raised is, we won't be able to control this. We won't be able to stop it. And let's say, how have we done with IVF? Terribly. If you look at IVF and screening and selection.
I'm going to jump in. So you guys are proposing regulation. Carter's saying we haven't regulated any of this ever, and it's already the Wild West, which it is, and you would concede that, I think.
Well, it depends.
Hold on, let me finish.
Sorry, I was trying to answer the question you asked. Orchid is in business, friends.
It is the one.
Orchid is in business, nucleus is in business.
So this whole debate is contingent on so many contingencies. Even if we get to the point where we can regulate it domestically, and we agree domestically, we all know that the wealthy, the connected, people who have home countries where this technology is available will just go and do it. The Chinese were the ones who already gene edited the first embryos, right? The embryonic stage. And so we already have these two little girls living in China in an undisclosed location, right?
One of them is mosaic for sure.
Yes, where we don't even know the downstream effects of what this doctor had done to them, the scientists. And so there's no guarantee that the safety of this population with all of these unknowns is going to be maintained by domestic regulation, which won't ever happen.
Let's just stay on the Chinese doctor for 1 second.
Sure.
We ran a really interesting piece about him recently and his wife, and anyway, it could be a great Netflix show.
Project.
Look it up, exactly. But Jamie, said that was a travesty or something like that.
I called it Nuremberg-style human experimentation.
But, for those who don't know in the room, and you guys will correct me if I'm wrong, this is a doctor who took it upon himself to make 2 babies, that are immune to HIV or
They're
AIDS.
not immune.
That was the goal.
That was the goal, okay. But
And
what makes that morally different than what you guys are suggesting?
This is because it was totally unethically done. They didn't get proper consents from the parents. They lied on the IRB, the review.
I'm talking about
it was bad science.
I'm asking about the substance, though.
It's preventative versus
That's what I'm getting at. And I want you to explain the difference.
That's what I think is different. And I think when we think about, there's the debate of, is it ethical or unethical, right? I think we all agree that curing disease at a germline stage, which you may not, but I think you do, is ethical with the right regulations, with the right safety and the right technology that we can understand the future implications of that. One day that will be the case. The question is really about, do we believe it's ethical or unethical? The fact to do it is ethical. And I think most of us agree with that. The fact of when to do it, at what point in our future will this be a point where it's safe and regulated is the question. And so our argument here is that this is an ethical thing to do, particularly as it relates to devastating disorders. And that's where it needs to be regulated.
But what I'm hearing a bit from the Carter and Lydia side of things is maybe, I don't want to say a different conversation, but there is a layer of religiosity and a sense of, I mean this in an observational way, of the connection between the parent and the child. The tenor of the arguments you're making sound a little different. And I don't know if you actually agree with what Allison is saying because of that.
Well, I feel like the arguments for doing anything you possibly can to save your child is equally normative, possibly religious in nature too. I think that the point on which would you all would agree then, if I can ask a question, that if we were to have this regulatory framework, which has never existed ever in the history of the United States in IVF, when all kinds of eugenic things are going on right now, and in fact are accelerating, put that to the side, you would agree with a regulatory regime that flat out banned any non-medical interventions, that would ban IQ, height, athletic talent, music, skin color, eye color. You'd agree with that? You'd ban, ban designing.
If we wanted to apply slippery slope arguments, nobody would ever go on a first date with somebody.
We already have a ski slope for 30 years in the United States to look at.
And so the issue is not where can every extreme slippery slope take us. The question, as you framed it in your introduction, Barry, is the human germline sacred and can never be altered by humans?
But the reason we're doing this debate is not because of a thing called germline. The reason we're doing this debate is what Carter's saying is true. It is already the Wild West out there.
So take the United Kingdom.
That's why it's interesting.
In the UK, they had a 20-year process, a deliberative process, through the Parliament established the Human Fertilization and Embryology Authority. They had extensive consultations. They educated the patients. They did town halls across the country, and they came up with this extremely careful regulatory system. And now eight children exist who are the product of mitochondrial transfer treatments, which are heritable. So already these are designer babies, and their lives have been saved through this process. We are all against all of these horrible extremes. We're against Nazism, eugenics, and all of these terrible things. But the question is, when faced with this narrow set of circumstances, are we going to deny parents the opportunity to take this deadly genetic mutation out of their germline in making this one small change? And if you accept that one small change, then you are voting for a moral imperative to enable people to do it. If you think nobody should ever be able to do it under any circumstances because of this imagined slippery slope argument, then you should vote for these other wonderful people.
Yeah, you go ahead.
No, Lydia, no. The thing I wanted, Carter, do you want to jump in, or can I put something in?
Yeah, go ahead. You go ahead.
What you have written so powerfully in your work about the over-medicalization, I'm sorry if I'm using the wrong terminology, of end of life and the pressures that are put on people and the sort of norms that get established once the door is open. And I'm thinking about organ donation and things you've written about that. Can you apply that same logic to this argument? In other words, once it becomes an option, how people feel the pressure to go along with it as a norm?
Oh, yeah. I mean, absolutely. That was sort of what I was trying to start to get at before. But even if something is very carefully scripted in this country, and I'm all for treating disease, I am a physician, even if something's very carefully scripted, very carefully regulated, it won't stay within the confines of this country, right? And so you will be able to buy your way, you will be able to extort your way, you'll be able to find some way to do what you want to do. And that is coupled, of course, with what you're getting at, Barry, which is sort of the technological imperative that drives so much of medicine. Often, patients feel like if there is an option, they want to move forward, not recognizing that sometimes life expectancy, quality of life, and many other factors are actually improved if you just don't do treatment. Now, that's not the case with treating a disease that's caused by a single edit. That's a very different scenario. But the possibility of doing something because we can is ever present in medicine. And then that's coupled with the hubris of physicians and physician scientists who think that really we are God's gift to humanity because we have come up with these great treatment plans. And you see this most notoriously, I'm going to get into trouble here, in oncology, where there is sort of a impetus to keep doing third line of chemotherapy, fourth line, fifth line, just keep going because we have something else in the tool bag, not recognizing that this is a human being who is suffering under the weight of all of this treatment, whose life is being shattered, who's becoming a professional patient because of what we can do. So all of that sort of lies behind my thinking, and I'm very, not nervous, I'm not a nervous person, that's the wrong word, but I'm very reluctant whenever my colleagues come in as sort of saviors who think that they have the answers. And I just think we need to be cautious. And what I still haven't heard the Jamie and Allison side concede is that once we start making germline edits that will be inherited for diseases we want to cure, that the door won't be opened to skin color, eye color, intelligence, and height. And I haven't heard that. I feel like you were almost conceding.
I think let's sharpen the question even a little bit. And I think this is really important what you're saying, Lydia, as usual. But let's sharpen the question. Would you accept a law that banned germline gene editing for non-medical traits?
So I think
yes or no?
I would be, my feeling is asking that question is, hold on, is conceding the entire debate. So my answer is, I would be totally fine with that, because if you believe that in these cases where you're going through IVF, you have, let's say, your single pre-implanted embryo, your embryo is carrying a single mutation for a deadly disorder that will be passed down to future generations. And if you believe that there should be a law only allowing that very specific intervention, then you believe that there is a moral imperative to allow...
Answer the question. Do you support that law?
I would be perfectly happy supporting
So you'd be happy to ban any kind of genetic screening or engineering
asking the
for the sake of elective plate?
Concedes the entire debate because you agree that there is a moral imperative. If there is a moral imperative in this one single case, then there is a moral imperative. By our saying that we should intervene in this one scenario doesn't mean that we're signing up for the Nazi party and we want to be part of eugenics. But the question is, are you going to deny this single case?
I will say that I live every day with postnatal gene editing and gene therapy. I talk to the FDA on a regular basis about this. There is definite regulations around gene editing and gene therapy postnatally and in utero. Huge regulations around it. The amount of work you need to do to prove safety and efficacy is tremendous.
Not for the application of the
and the application for it. Postnatal and in utero, not
not
I'm talking about
not
somatic.
embryonic. So this is
I'm talking about somatic. So postnatal, baby's born, and they have devastating disorders, and we're doing a gene therapy clinical trial. The amount of regulations you go through, including monkeys and mice
for
and
safety
rats,
and efficacy.
For safety and efficacy.
Right, not for ethics, for safety and efficacy.
For safety and efficacy.
Exactly.
Yes. The amount you go through for that. So the question was, are there any regulations or it's the wild, wild west? It is 100% not the wild, wild west postnatally and in utero. And now gene editing, because CRISPR is happening, as we all know, with KJ, the little baby from CHOP, that just had a gene edit for liver metabolic disorder.
Somatic gene editing.
Somatic, right, postnatal. So what I'm saying, and now they're going to in utero, so they're going in the womb and the baby's being developed. What I'm saying is that there are regulations that are there. It is very strict regulations that are there, and there's no reason those regulations are not going to be pulled down until they're younger and younger, where you can address more cells more safely. That is very different than what's happening on the in vitro fertilization front, which is very different than the medical intervention front. And I believe that the world needs to come together to improve those regulations and that safety in order to make it safe to address the disease at the earliest time. So my answer is, yes, I would agree that it should be for medical indications that are a necessity only, as long as there are appropriate regulations and it is considered safe, and we can understand the risk-benefit tolerance based on those impacted by the disease, not based on people that think they understand disease but don't live with the disease or don't experience the disease. Because a lot of people will say, how dare you, why would you take such a risk? Well, until you live with the disease, living every day is a risk. The risk of doing nothing completely outweighs the risk of doing something for very debilitating diseases. So that's where I would draw my line. Medical intervention, yes.
So both.
I just want to underline one thing. I want to ask you guys, the baby that Allison just referenced, that I mentioned in my opening statement, that has the somatic editing.
Somatic
if you could
editing.
go back and do germline editing to get rid of that, would you do it?
Is the condition a heritable condition?
No, it is de novo. It's a de novo mutation.
So no, it's not a heritable condition.
The gene happens at the egg or sperm stage.
Yeah.
The family's just not a carrier. It's just a random, like my daughter,
Gotcha.
random mutation at the egg stage. So she had Angelman syndrome from the day of fertilization.
Gotcha.
And the only way to fix her entire brain was to do it at the stage of fertilization. Doing it postnatally, where her brain is developed, we can only get to 10% of her cells. So we can't fix her.
Right.
We
No,
can
of course.
only help her.
Could you edit the gametes? Would it work
Well,
to edit the
if
gametes?
you do it at the egg or sperm
Yeah,
stage,
that's what I'm
you
saying.
would be editing the
Yeah.
gametes. If you do it postnatally, you still might get to the gametes.
Could you still succeed in having a child without this heritable disorder if you edited the right gametes and corrected the genetic abnormality in the egg that you just described?
If you can correct her egg when she was fertilized, yes.
Yeah, so that's, okay. So
But
that's,
that would be
it's still heritable.
that's still heritable.
Can I say one very quick thing? If you were to ask someone on the street, what is a designer baby? They wouldn't say it's a baby who's had a genetic illness that's been fixed in utero at the embryonic stage, or they would say.
They might.
No, they would, for sure.
I don't think they would, because a designer baby is a baby that has been created for the sake of elective traits and characteristics.
But Barry framed this topic in your introductory remarks. And so again, as you framed it, there is heritable genetic manipulations. So if you believe that editing a heritable genetic disorder, a single gene mutation causing a deadly, heritable, maybe not so deadly, you have to grow to reproductive age to pass it on to future generations, if you believe that it would be ethical to edit that pre-implanted embryo to fix that one gene, that one mutation, then you
there's
support...
a reason we use the phrase designer babies, because it's provocative and because you guys mean very different things when you use it.
And so if I were in the audience and someone said, are you in favor of designer babies? I wouldn't interpret it as saying, are you in favor of a therapeutic intervention to restore a genetic abnormality? That's not, it's provocative, but no one objects to helping children.
No, but everybody, as you said in your own thing, that all of, which was incorrect, but that all of these commissions have said it can never be done.
I didn't use the word never. You can look at the statement. I said exactly what you said.
What we said in the WHO.
You said not right now.
We said not right now, which means that at some point, went for this exact kind of scenario, not like happened with He Jiankui in 2018 and 2019, but when there is a deadly genetic disorder that can be fixed at the embryonic stage so that a child doesn't die or have a very painful life.
So Jamie, let me jump in. So I have maybe been the most conservative on this stage, although that's not my usual role in life. And I do think we need to be careful about anything that is passed on. But there's a way to think about this kind of a macro view of it, which is that if we get to the point where we are letting everybody make whatever edits they want, because we've been able to figure out how to get skin color, eye color, intelligence, and height, and athleticism, and piano ability built into this whole algorithm, that's going to be so many more edits with so many more possible unknowns than the one-off occasional.
Why is the category of passing on sacred? Why is that a sacred category?
It's a safety issue.
But why is it okay to pass on Huntington's disease or pass on deadly disease, but not okay to pass on a fixed gene that will no longer pass on Huntington's disease? Why is that okay?
No. So the point that I'm trying to make is that if we have your regulation in place and it were implementable worldwide, there would be very few of these changes which create the unknowns, because I don't think we'll ever get to 100% safety predictably. So it will create far fewer unknowns. And I think that there would be a world in which we could all come together and say, yes, let's treat these very rare diseases that are single edits, preventing this from ever happening. But there's no way that it's not going to expand, where we will then have millions and millions and millions of edits into the gene pool worldwide. And that's the problem. That's what I don't see how you can ever be comfortable with, because even if we get our safety pretty close, we will be opening the door to so many more unknowns by this going globally.
And so there is, with every kind of thing, there's a possibility if we start something that will keep going and going. And so I'm not going to say that that's an impossible view, even though these traits that we're talking about, like intelligence, I mean, it's thousands and thousands of genes. We don't even know how many. That is 500 years from now. Now we have people who are being born with deadly genetic disorders that could potentially be prevented before they're born and before they are implanted in the mother. Yes, there are fears of slippery slopes, and the question is, for this 500 years from now fear, which I think is legitimate, do we want to sacrifice all of these kids who are going to die when we have all kinds of other situations where there are ways of treating people where we say we're going to do it in limited cases? Allison mentioned gene therapy. It's not like everybody's doing gene therapy. Are there people who are going to Panama and Kazakhstan to do kind of crazy gene and stem cell therapies? Absolutely yes, and it's horrible. Are there people who have terrible diseases like Victoria Gray, who's been cured of sickle cell disease, for who now she has a life with her 4 children? So yes, we should be afraid of slippery slopes. But does that mean that we should ban a potentially life-saving treatment that can really help people now?
But just to be clear, this is not a 500-year in the future possibility.
No,
Silicon Valley is ready to capitalize on this
but
as soon as possible.
But to do enough gene edits to influence something like intelligence, that is hundreds of years beyond our capacity.
I don't think so. Why would that be hundreds of years?
We don't know what controls it.
So many genes.
We don't know what controls intelligence.
Lydia was 100% correct about the complexity of biology. We know very, very little about the full complexity of our biology. So with these single gene mutation disorders, we know that if you have one letter that's off, it can be totally deadly or devastating. Once you get to these levels of complexity, or these elective things that are thousands of genes, like in intelligence, that to make that number of change, we would fry people, because we just don't understand. So what we're talking about, and yes, will we go from addressing single gene mutation disorders to 2 gene mutation disorders to 3? And the answer is probably yes. Will we get to designing, people who are 20 feet tall and green with huge muscles? Like that's science fiction.
So no designer babies then. The reason, as a safety matter, as a matter of complexity, that germline is treated differently by all of these intergovernmental bodies and by all these countries is because making a mistake in this context has multi-generational and catastrophic consequences. That's why it's hard to, that's why they're saying not now until we get this thing sorted. Now, our colleagues are suggesting that we can get it sorted out and have safety and efficacy squared away, and those sorts of safety considerations are going to be off the table. Again, it seems to me that the issue is, again, medical treatment. If I were to get a medical treatment myself, I wouldn't be designing myself. If I were to try to give myself, enhance my memory or wakefulness or something like that, that in the world of enhancement is something that people associate with design. And the problem is we have a terrible track record. And I would say that the Warnock Commission and the HFEA in the UK is actually not a good example, because if you talk to Baroness Warnock, she says, we basically were making it up. We were having these staged events. We came back, we made up a 14-day rule. It didn't really mean anything about when you can stop working on an embryo versus when you have to stop doing research on an embryo 14 days. And so the UK is not a good example of how to, and it also regulatorily is not analogous to our federalist framework and our regulatory state either. But the bottom line is, it's not a slippery slope to say, how have we done with IVF? Have we been able to police the distinction between therapeutic interventions versus enhancement versus non-therapeutic? And the answer is we've done no job at all. The FDA will regulate the safety and efficacy of these interventions. It will not and cannot, under its statutory authority, speak to the ethics of it. The FDA has nothing to say about how you use this for eugenic purposes, for therapeutic purposes, for enhancement purposes. That is beyond the scope of their authority, and so it's not a slippery slope. We look at what happened in the ART industry now. The only people who are animated to lobby in Congress are the American Society for Reproductive Medicine, which is like full steam ahead, in which Sean Tipton, who is their principal lobbyist, said, I would not accept any law that restricted sex selection, because people should have maximal reproductive autonomy, because it's important to people to have a reproductive experience that's meaningful to them.
You mentioned IVF, 1978 with Louise Brown. There were tons of people, there were these massive debates about whether IVF should be banned, and the Catholic Church and other people were saying this is an abomination. So yes, there's a bit of a Wild West, but how many lives have been brought into the world through IVF? And so again, the question is, do we have to ban this thing?
Okay, you guys are going to have a chance.
Because we're afraid of slippery slopes.
You guys are all going to have a chance to make your closing arguments right now, because this was fascinating and I realized I completely lost track of time. Thank you, Joey, for telling me that. Yeah. Jamie, let's start with you.
So I will say, Lydia is 100% correct. Human biology is extremely complex. What we're talking about is intervening in very complex systems. We don't understand them all that well, but we do know that in situations where there are small mutations causing massive harms, we may have the ability to fix them. And so labeling this whole field of science, this whole field of medicine as inherently unethical would deny us this potential opportunity even before we begin. I think you used the word certainly unethical. I don't think that is the case. When we say a moral imperative, it's not a moral imperative for everybody to do it. It's a moral imperative for us to be open to the possibility to create a regulatory infrastructure so that people can have the ability to bring future life into the world in a safe way. We have that. It's a little bit confusing for you in your voting, but I've been part of these debates for 20 years, and Barry had it exactly right. If you believe that it is ever ethical to make a single gene manipulation, a single letter manipulation to change a life that would be short and deadly to extended by making this single letter change to a pre-implanted embryo, you have no choice but to vote for us. I mean, that is the essential thing. Nobody is saying we should design green giants wandering there. That is the question: should germline heritable mutation be allowed in any circumstance? If you believe that, you should vote for us. If you don't believe that it should, if you believe with what Lydia is saying, that under no circumstances should it ever be allowable, then that's a very ethical view, different than ours, and you should vote for them.
Okay, Carter, let's go to you.
So the good news is no one on this stage supports the creation of designer babies, and therefore everyone on the stage should vote the way 66% of the audience did, because you guys were right in thinking, am I voting for open-ended modification of my child to meet my own aspirations and desires, not merely the narrow question of, in certain circumstances, if, hypothetically, the safety and efficacy were resolved and, hypothetically, a regulatory framework could be created that is better and different than the absence of one that we have had for the past 30 years in the analogous context of ART, where they're already selling products for designer babies. If you believe in all of that, that you still should vote yes, because designer babies, the reason it's provocative is because it has to do with enhancement. It has to do with choice about the identity of a child that have nothing to do with their health and flourishing. It is not designer babies to change, certainly not somatic gene therapy, and we don't live in a world right now where there's safe and efficacious germline gene therapy, nor do we live in a world where there's a regulatory scheme that could prevent these non-medical interventions, and therefore everyone should join Jamie and reject the notion of designer babies.
Thank you, Carter. Allison?
So I think we all agree that the definition of design needs to be clarified, and I think we also all agree that the definition of design is selective editing. And selective editing can accommodate various different traits. And what we're proposing here is that the traits that we feel deserve to be designed are those in which cause significant debilitating and or deadly disorders that we can control. And being that we cannot generally control them after birth, and we are living and succumbing to a life of incredible devastation, but we have an opportunity in which we can try to edit after birth. We can try to edit during pregnancy in utero, which is very well regulated and very well controlled with the scientific advancements progressing rapidly. It means to me that as we get lower and lower in age and we can address the disorders with more safety, more efficacy, and improve the distribution of the edit to the organs that need it most, it is very clear that the question is it ethical or unethical? And it's very clear to me that it's completely ethical. What we're saying is that if it is ethical to help treat a baby that has a devastating disorder that you couldn't treat otherwise outside of abortion, in which case you are having another debate that is not on this stage, then the answer is clear. The answer is clear. And I think when we all agree that genome editing is acceptable after birth, we all agree that genome editing might be acceptable after the fetus is fertilized in utero. Where the debate here is the germline. Well, I hate to say it, but postnatal editing actually does affect the germline, because in vivo editing, where you deliver the edit into the blood of a born child, gets to the sperm or the egg if it's a male or a female. Therefore, we are editing the sperm and the egg in a live baby that is currently under regulation, that is currently in clinical trials in multiple genetic disorders, of which each one of these are rare, sometimes ultra rare, affecting less than 200,000 kids per disease in the country. Yet there are 7,000 rare genetic disorders that are affecting babies and affecting adults and completely destroying the lives of them and their families.
Thank you so much.
As a professional ethicist, my husband likes to remind me that there are good ethics and bad ethics. And I have heard my colleagues' opponents use the word ethics many times. And so we just want to be very, very clear about what kind of ethics we're talking about. We all agree on treating disease. We all agree, I think, in very rare circumstances, perhaps editing the genome when we understand all of the genetic implications of this, which we've also all agreed we won't get to, and it's properly regulated, which we also have said is nearly impossible in this country and certainly not possible worldwide. So in some sort of utopic vision of the future, it makes absolute sense to move forward and treat. Short of a utopia, then we have to draw the line somewhere where we decide perhaps something is permissible, making an edit is permissible in a germline to treat a disease. But because we cannot guarantee any sort of safety, and we know that this will only lead to Pandora's box globally, and millions of edits that have unknown repercussions on the health of humanity, we need to be very cautious in moving forward, get all of our ducks in a row, and make sure that there is consensus, as Jamie has worked very hard toward before any undertaking of this sort takes place. And so therefore, if this is the way we're defining designer baby, we continue to be opposed to it, and we encourage the audience to use an abundance of caution and prudence in weighing this, and vote no on designer babies.
Okay. It's really fun being the stupidest person on a stage. This was really, really incredibly thoughtful. I want all of you guys to take out your phones one more time. And now it's going to be the moment of truth, because now you're going to get to vote again. I want you to text vote 2 to the number on the screen. It's 888-465-2807. You're going to vote A if you want to vote with these guys, and you're going to vote B if you want to vote with these guys. Okay. While you're voting, there's a few people that I really need to thank for putting on such an incredible event tonight, and especially given the stress of today. I want to thank my colleagues at the Free Press, Olga Moriarty, Ryan, Joey, and Isaac, and Sean for producing tonight's event. Also Marissa Harari, Ellie Stein, Lucy Biggers, Yana Kozlowski, Aaron Otwell, Dennis Berman, and the rest of the Free Press team. I also want to give an enormous thanks to my dear friend and the editor of Tablet Magazine, Alana Newhouse. Perhaps you guys read her incredible essay that we published this afternoon. If you haven't, please go home and read it. She was essential in putting this whole debate on my radar, and I'm incredibly grateful to her. And I also wanted to give an enormous thank you to my friends at FIRE for their partnership and generous support of this entire debate series. Our next one is coming up in Chicago. And those people by name are Greg Lukianoff, Malvi Shah, and Ashley Adams. I want you guys to stand up so people know who you are. Thank you guys so much. They're going to be hanging out outside the theater. They'll be at the after party. They like to drink, go up to them, schmooze with them, and learn more about FIRE, this really incredible organization. Okay, it is time to see who has changed the most minds tonight. Come on, baby. Bring me that screen. If not, I'm going to ask these guys a lightning round, which I can do. Guys, here we go. Is designing babies unethical or a moral imperative? Okay, by 1 point. This is a genetic edit of 1 letter. I gotta give it to this team for moving it by 1 single point. But you guys can walk away with a majority. These guys moved it by 1 point. Thank you all so much for joining us, and looking forward to being with all of you right after this. Thank you.